Hello again, everyone. This is Dr. Brian Bradford back with you. And today we're going to talk about one of the most important documents in church history, for the early church, that is. And it's called the Didache. That's Didache, or in Greek, Didache, the hard CH. And this means a teaching or an instruction. Now, the manuscripts we have actually have two titles. The short one is Didache ton Dodeca Apostolon, which means the teaching of the 12 apostles. And the longer manuscript title we have is Didache Kuriou dia ton Dodeca Apostolon tois ethnesin, which means the teaching of the Lord through the 12 apostles to the Gentiles, or to the nations, you could say. Now, this document is important because it's dated as early as about the year 80 to 100, and the Greek language that we find inside of it matches the New Testament references, so this tells us it was contemporary with or reliant upon the Gospels. The belief has always been that the apostles handed down these teachings to the earliest Jewish Christian communities, but we can't be sure if the apostles as we know them were the actual authors, or if it was handed down in a tradition from them to the next generation. The Didache is important for our Catholic community because it is considered the first written catechism of the church. This is related to the word katecheo, which means to tell or instruct. So the Didache means how these things were to be taught to the earliest Christian communities. The Didache is also important because it provides the earliest rites on baptism, receiving the Eucharist, and it describes events that contemporaries believed signaled the end times. Chapter 1 of the Didache starts by stating, "There are two ways, one of life and one of death, and here are the differences between the two." Pretty straightforward. The way of life is this: to love the God who made you, to love your neighbor as yourself, and to do to others what you would expect to be done to you. The Didache also tells us to pray for our enemies, for those persecuting you, to turn the other cheek to those striking you, to walk that extra mile with someone, and to give your tunic to someone who also took your cloak. And we know from the Gospels that these are taken from Matthew and Luke. Chapter 1 of the Didache also states, "Blessed is the one who gives according to these rules. If any who truly has a need takes as they need, they are blameless. But if one takes when they have no true need, they will stand trial on the day of judgment." Another original quote that we find in the Didache is, "Let your gifts to the needy sweat in your hands until you understand to whom you might give it." Isn't that interesting? Chapter 2 of the Didache lists a series of further commandments, and they are very, very enlightening. You will not murder, commit adultery. And the next term is a compound word that could be translated as you will not be a seducer of children. Stated next is that you shall not engage in sexual immorality. Now, this is different from the term for adultery, and in this context is related to fornication as part of contemporary polytheistic non-Christian cults. Next, it tells us you shall not steal, you shall not be a magician or practice the occult arts of false prophets, you shall not make magic potions as these magicians and prophets make. Next is the instruction, you shall not murder offspring by means of phthora, which translates to abortion. Now, if you look at the usage of this term in ancient Greek before the New Testament, about 2,500 years ago, we get a deeper understanding of this term. In the writing of Hippocrates, who's considered the father of Western medicine about 460 BC, the term scientifically means the breakdown or the deterioration of any organic, natural material. In this case, it means the destruction of an unborn fetus, because the term teknon is used here, as in the writing of Hippocrates, not only means offspring, it also refers to an unborn fetus, and in later writings to an infant or a child. In the medical writings of other Greek authors, this term also means the destruction of a person through an immoral act, or the total destruction of an entity and even the seduction of a woman that leads to such an act. This term is also found in the New Testament 9 times and is usually translated as destructive, destruction, corruption, or something perishable, or simply to destroy. The Hippocratic Oath, which dates to about 400 BC, which is attributed to Hippocrates, states that a physician will not give a woman a device or drug to cause an abortion. But we know the modern version does not include this traditional passage. The next series of instructions begin with the phrase teknon mu, which means my child. This indicates a very close-knit parent-to-child type of relationship between the apostles and the early Christian community. For example, it says, "My child, flee from every evil. Do not become lustful. Do not become a diviner. Do not do anything that is false or complain and grumble." Chapter 3 adds, "To be humble, since the humble will inherit the earth." Chapter 3 of the Didache ends by stating, "You will welcome the activities that happen to you as good things, knowing that without God, nothing happens." Chapter 4 guides believers to seek the presence of the saints every day in order that you might rely upon their words. Now, isn't that interesting? Now, for Catholics, that's very important because it informs us that the communion of the saints was understood and emphasized as a part of daily life for very early Christianity. Remember, we're talking about the year 80 to 100 when this was probably written. Probably here, though, referring to biblical characters and the earliest martyrs of the church. Chapter 4 of the Didache continues and says, "You will not hesitate when you give, and you will not grumble when you give, and you will not turn away anyone being in need." Chapter 4 concludes with 2 important statements. The first is this: "You will not abandon the rules of the Lord, but you will guard the things that you have received, neither adding nor taking away anything." The second hits at the celebration of the Mass, for it says, "In church you will confess your failings and not go to prayer feeling guilty of sin." It concludes with the emphatic phrase, "This is the way of life." Chapter 5 goes in the opposite direction and details what is the way of death. This is a list of negative attributes taken from the previous chapters of the Didache. These include murder, adultery, theft, idolatry, robbery, arrogance, malice, greed, foul speech, jealousy, those who do not show mercy to the poor, the murderers of children, those who turn away from the needy. The summation here is that anyone who practices any of these are a totally sinful person. Chapter 5 concludes with, "May you be saved, children, from all of these." Chapter 7 is also very interesting and important because it gives us the instructions and prescriptions for baptism. It tells us the one is to be immersed, eis to anima tu patras kai tu huiou, kai tu hagu pneumatas. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, they are to be baptized in flowing water. But if no flowing water is available, use other water. If not in cold, then in warm water. And if you have neither, then pour out water on the head 3 times in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. The Didache also says that the one being baptized as well as the one baptizing should both fast for 2 days prior to baptism. In addition, they are commanded to fast on the 4th day of the week and on the Sabbath. Chapter 8, verse 2 of the Didache gives the instruction on how to pray as the Lord ordered in his gospel. And this, of course, is the Our Father, or the Lord's Prayer, as some call it. When we look at this version of the Didache, there are a few differences with the versions in Matthew 6, 9 through 13, and Luke 11, 2 through 4, but for the most part, the versions in the New Testament are almost identical with this one. A unique addition that we find in the Didache is that the Our Father is insisted to be prayed 3 times a day. Interesting. Chapter 9 provides specific prayers that were said during the celebration of the Mass, such as, Concerning the cup, thanks are to be given to the holy vine of David, which was revealed through the servant Jesus. And regarding the bread, thanks was to be given for the life and knowledge which was also revealed through your servant Jesus. Now this phrase is interesting. In Greek it has dia Iesu to paidas su, which means through or by means of your servant Jesus. This presents us, I think, with a very simple understanding of Jesus as God's servant or son, without any perplexing Greek language or complex theological terminology. The one and only direct use of the term Jesus Christ is found in the Didache in chapter 9, verse 4, and is part of the concluding Eucharistic prayer and states, "Yours is the glory and power through Jesus Christ forever." This section of the Eucharist concludes by stating, "Let no one eat or drink from your Eucharist, except those baptized in the name of the Lord, for the Lord has said likewise concerning this. Do not give what is holy to the dogs." Taken from Matthew 7, verse 6, I believe. The Didache also instructs how to deal with visitors who identify themselves as apostles or prophets. Now, isn't that interesting that considering about the years 80 to 100, there were still people considered to be prophets? Interesting. First, you are to receive them as the Lord would. They are to remain 1 day. 2, if there's an extra need. But if they should remain for 3 days, they are a false prophet. Now, isn't that a perplexing comment? It continues and says, you are to provide them with a loaf of bread which will last them until they reach their next destination. On the other hand, if they should ask for silver, they are a false prophet. Let me say that again, ladies and gentlemen. If they should ask for silver, they are a false prophet. I don't know about you, but that brings up for me so many images of televangelists in their fleets of private jets, but that's for another time. Chapter 11 provides criteria on testing the legitimacy of those claiming to be prophets. The Didache says to not judge or put on trial everyone claiming to be speaking in the Spirit. However, it also says that not everyone speaking in the Spirit is a prophet. Their habits will reveal whether or not they are true. And the criteria to determine the legitimacy of a prophet is as follows. Now, if a prophet orders a table to be set for a meal while in the Spirit, they should not eat from it. If they do otherwise, they are a false prophet. In addition, if a prophet does not practice the truth they teach, they are a false prophet. But if a prophet has passed these tests and does a worldly mystery for the church, they should not be judged. The Didache also emphasizes that if a prophet who claims to be in the Spirit says, "Give me silver," you are not to listen to them. Chapter 12 instructs to receive everyone who comes in the name of the Lord. Now, if a traveler arrives, you are to help them as needed. They are not to stay more than 2 or 3 days. But if they decide to settle down, they can only eat if they are a craftsman and provide something for the community. If they do not have a craft, you are to determine ahead of time how that Christian will live among you. Chapter 12 sums up that if a traveler does not want to work and has no craft to contribute to the Christian community, you are to be careful of them and be on guard because they are no more than a merchant buying and selling Christ. Isn't that interesting? Chapter 13 of the Didache states that only true prophets, teachers, and laborers are worthy of food. It also adds that the first portions of the harvest set aside for God are to go to the prophets among the Christian community. But if there is no prophet, these goods are to be given to beggars. Now, what if our local governments, what if the world governments acted this way? That would change the entire scope of humanity, would it not? Now, this begs the question again, who were these prophets? How many? Where were they? Where did they come from? Chapter 14 introduces us to further Eucharistic prayers that were said during the Mass. The faithful are first instructed to confess their sins or wrongdoings beforehand, so that their sacrifice and personal act of offering may be pure. Only then will the divine institution of breaking bread take place. Now, the Didache also instructs followers that the Eucharist should be withheld from anyone who has an existing conflict with a companion, any member of the church, and they should not go for Eucharist until they've reconciled. This ensures an undefiled sacrifice. This can also be translated as in order that their sacrifice may not be called common. This indicates that receiving the Eucharist involves more than mere attendance and hollow participation. Since this community consisted of Jewish Christians, it is no surprise then that these references to our pure sacrifice derive from the book of Malachi. For example, the Didache quotes Malachi 1, verse 11 and verse 14, I believe, and says, "In every place and time offer to God a pure sacrifice with incense. You will know that God's name was wondrous among the Gentiles because the Lord says, I am a great king." Chapter 15 even has criteria for the appointment of bishops and deacons. The Didache tells us they are to be gentle, they are not to be lovers of money, they are to be truthful, and after having withstood the test, they can be approved as genuine. In addition, they are to be honored as much as prophets and teachers. The last chapter of the Didache, 16, reveals what the earliest Christian communities expected regarding the end times, what the Didache describes as entais eschatais hemerais, which means in the last days. First, readers are told to be watchful of their life and to be prepared, for you do not know the hour in which the Lord is coming. Now, in the Greek text, this is almost the exact language used in Matthew 24:42 and 25:13. It is also imperative to meet frequently and discuss matters of faith that pertain to the soul. More specifically, the Didache says, in that final, fixed, definite moment of the Lord's return, we are told that a faith-filled life is useless and will be of no benefit unless we have believed without wavering. Chapter 16, verse 3 provides the specific criteria of what will happen in the last days. The Didache says that the last days will see an increase in the numbers of pseudeprophetae and photherais. This first term is false prophets, and the second term was mentioned earlier in chapter 2, and in that context was translated as abortion. However, here in chapter 16 of the Didache, in this context, it could apply to abortion as well. But some translations and footnotes in some of the scholarly works suggest it should be translated more as corrupters or those who bring about moral and spiritual ruin. But I don't know. I guess it could go either way. Chapter 16 continues and says that sheep will be turned into wolves, love will be turned into hate, and that lawlessness will increase betrayals and persecution throughout the world. Much of this language and context is taken from Matthew 24:24 and Matthew 13:22. Chapter 16, verse 5 of the Didache introduces to us the one who is called the world deceiver. And he will appear as the Son of God, and he will do signs and wonders. The usual word for wonder is not used here, but instead it is a word teras that means a type of omen or premonition or a generic type of prophetic warning. The emphasis is that the genuine power of God to heal and perform true miracles in our lives should not be confused with any type of fraudulent, counterfeit type of divination, especially by someone who puts themselves or their acts in place of God or above God. We read further that the world will be turned over and betrayed into the hands of the world deceiver, and this is the exact same verb that is used when Jesus is handed over and betrayed in the Gospels. The world, then, will do the same to itself regarding this deceiver. The Didache also states that the world deceiver will commit unlawful, detestable, and wicked things that have never been done since the beginning of time. The same term is used in 1 Peter 4, verse 3, when describing the empty worship of idols. Chapter 16, verse 5 is perhaps the most significant topic in all the Didache because it describes what can be considered the earliest and most detailed doctrine of purgatory. This reads, the creation of man will come into the burning, painful test of examination, and this will cause many to give up their faith and be destroyed. But those having endured and suffered patiently in their faith, they will be saved by the means of the accursed act itself. So, wow, folks, this is some intense, interesting language here. And we also find this term for burning in 1 Peter 4, verse 12, and used in a context meaning trial by fire. And in Revelation 18:18, it describes the burning of Babylon. The term for test or trial or examination is only found in Hebrews 3, verse 9. In ancient Greek, before the New Testament, it meant to prove through a trial or even a person's legal probation before their character was proven innocent or truthful in a court of law. Isn't that interesting? So, this world deceiver will create this burning trial for all of humanity, and this will be the cause for many to give up their faith. The word for this event derives from the term scandalizo and is the origin and root of our word scandal, which means disgrace, shame, or dishonor in Greek. And in this context, the shame and dishonor is the destruction of those who abandon their faith. But, on the other hand, those who stand firm in their faith during this fiery trial, they will be saved. If you ask me, this is a rather clear concept of purgatory. Now, chapter 16 of the Didache concludes by stating that signs of truth will appear, which will indicate the return of Jesus. These include an extension of heaven, the sounding of trumpets, and the resurrection of all the holy ones who will arrive with the Lord. Only then will the world see the Lord arriving atop the clouds of heaven. Now, this last phrase is frequently used in the Bible and is found in Daniel 7:13, Matthew 24:30 and 26:63, Mark 14:62, Luke 21:27, Revelation 1:7, and several times in the non-biblical book of Enoch. So the Didache presents several key concepts to the growing Christian faith and some doctrinal insight, including such rites as baptism, the Eucharist, the end times, purgatory, the signs of the end times, the great deceiver, and his or her actions, I suppose, at the end times. This has been Dr. Brian Bradford on Good Shepherd Catholic Radio. Thank you for listening, and I will be with you next time.